was not issued a formal hearing, was not given a chance to respond in writing, and received no copy of the alleged complaint. These are procedural violations that undermine her rights and place her at risk of homelessness for a noise complaint that never existed. He said that last part slowly, not dramatic, just steady, plain. Wexler didn't speak for a while. The defense attorney tried to shift focus, claiming Tiana had a history of behavioral complaints, but Jalen countered each one with documentation proving they were vague, unsupported, or flat-out false. "You came prepared," Wexler said under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Jalen didn't smile. He wasn't here for that. He just stood there, calm as ever, hands folded. But the hardest part wasn't making his case. It was surviving a system that expected him to fail from the moment he opened his mouth. The courtroom didn't feel the same anymore. What started as entertainment for some, a kid trying to be a lawyer, was now uncomfortable. Quiet. People were leaning forward instead of laughing. Even the clerk had stopped typing. Jalen walked back to the plaintiff's table and opened his binder again, flipping straight to the back. "I'd like to call my first witness," he said. "Ms. Cheney, apartment 3B. The judge blinked. "You brought a witness?" "Yes, Your Honor. She's present and willing to testify." The older woman with the walker, Ms. Cheney, stood up slowly from the gallery. She moved with care, her steps small, but her eyes focused. Jalen offered her an arm as she made her way to the front. Once seated and sworn in, Jalen approached. "Ms. Cheney, did you file a noise complaint against Ms. Tiana Rowe on February 8th? "No, I did not," she said without hesitation. "Were you asked to?" "Not directly, but the manager came by earlier that week, asking questions about the younger tenants. Said he was trying to clean things up." "Did you ever observe Ms. Rowe causing disturbances in the building?" "Never. That girl works harder than anybody in the building." "And did anyone from management inform you a report had been filed in your name?" "No. First time I heard about it was from this young man right here." Jalen nodded. No further questions. The defense attorney stood up, but Wexler raised a hand. "No need," he said quietly. "Let her rest." The room stayed still as Ms. Cheney made her way back to the bench with help from the bailiff. Jalen turned back to the judge. "We also have timestamped security footage from the hospital where Ms. Rowe works. It confirms her entry and exit on the date in question. Her supervisor also submitted a signed statement verifying her shift hours." He slid a USB across the table. The courtroom projector came to life. The screen showed a grainy hallway, 6:45 p.m. Tiana walking in, hospital badge around her neck, hair pulled back, scrubs on. Next clip, 7:15 a.m. Her exiting the same hallway, shoulders slumped, hair messy, exhaustion on her face. Wexler tapped his pen slowly against his desk. The defense attorney didn't speak. He was staring at the screen, arms crossed, jaw tight. When the footage ended, Wexler looked at Jalen. "Mr. Prescott, you've made your point." Jalen didn't relax. He stood still. "There's one more thing," he said. He pulled a folded letter from his pocket, unfolded it carefully, and handed it to the bailiff. It was from another tenant, Maria Estevez, a single mother who'd moved out 2 months earlier after receiving 3 vague notices of lease violations. In the letter, she described the intimidation, the letters, and how the property manager told her, "It's easier for everybody if you just leave." The judge read it silently, lips pressed into a thin line. After a long pause, he leaned forward and rested his hands on the bench. "I've been on this bench for 19 years, he said slowly, "and I've never seen a kid walk in here with this level of preparation, confidence, and evidence, especially not without a law degree." He looked at Jalen for a long time, then at the defense attorney. "You've got a lot to answer for," he told the lawyer. Turning back to Jalen, he added, "Your case is compelling. More than that, it's airtight." Jalen didn't smile. He simply nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." But this wasn't about praise. It was about the fact that no one expected him to make it this far. And yet, here he stood, unshaken. The courtroom didn't clap. No one stood. This wasn't a movie. But the energy had shifted. Even the court reporter glanced at Jalen now with something different in her eyes, something like respect. The defense attorney, Mr. Brian Lowell, stood up finally, clutching a folder that suddenly felt thinner than it had that morning. "We'd like to motion for a short recess to review this new material," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Wexler shook his head. "You've had weeks to prepare. The footage is dated. The letter is signed. You were informed of the witnesses in the case summary." He tapped the bench with his pen. Motion denied. Continue. Lowell walked slowly back to his table, flipping pages like they'd rearranged themselves. He tried again, this time pushing for dismissal based on procedural irregularities, but the judge cut him off. "Irregularities like not producing the lease logs when asked?" Wexler said, raising an eyebrow. Silence. Jalen glanced down at his notepad, then turned to look at Tiana. She sat quietly, hands clasped in her lap. Her leg bounced under the table, but her face was unreadable. He leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" She nodded, barely. Back at the bench, Wexler cleared his throat. "Let's be honest here," he said. "This wasn't supposed to be a real case, not in your mind, Mr. Lowell, not in mine either, if I'm being truthful." Lowell shifted. "You thought you'd walk in, call the bluff, and it'd be over in 15 minutes. But it turns out, this young man did more homework than most third-year associates I've had in front of me." Jalen didn't react, not out of pride, but because the fight wasn't finished yet. "I'd like to call the building manager," Jalen said. "Objection," Lowell snapped. "He wasn't listed in the... He was subpoenaed, responded via email. The court has a copy of the confirmation," Jalen replied, flipping to the exact page and sliding it toward the judge. Wexler scanned it, then nodded. "He's in the hallway. Bring him in." The door opened, and in walked a stocky man in his late 30s with a clipboard and an attitude. His name was Phil Hayworth, and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He sat down, took the oath, and folded his arms. Jalen stepped up. Mr. Hayworth, can you explain why Ms. Rowe was issued a violation for a complaint that can't be traced to any resident? I had a report, Phil said flatly. From who? I don't remember the name. It was written down. Where is it now? I don't have it. Might have gotten lost. You filed a lease violation based on an anonymous claim with no supporting evidence. Is that correct? Look, I manage over 100 tenants. Yes or no? Phil glanced at the judge, then back at Jalen. Yes. Jalen opened the binder to a printout. Did you write this email to your regional manager on February 10th? We're going to start removing the problematic ones. Starting with 2C, they won't fight it. Phil's eyes widened. That was taken out of context. What's the context where calling tenants problems is okay? Silence. Do you consider working class tenants a problem? Phil looked like he wanted to disappear. He looked at the judge, but Wexler didn't blink. No further questions, Jalen said. Phil was dismissed. When he walked past the gallery, a few people shook their heads. Ms. Cheney stared at the floor. Back at the plaintiff's table, Jalen sat down slowly. His jaw was tight now, not from nerves, but from holding everything in. The anger, the frustration, the exhaustion from staying up all night researching rental codes and legal definitions. It was finally coming out, but not in shouts, in facts. But even with the truth on your side, justice isn't guaranteed. Not until someone has the courage to make the room uncomfortable. For a full 10 seconds, no one spoke. Wexler sat still, chin resting on one hand, glasses sliding down his nose. He looked like he was seeing the courtroom differently now, like the walls had shifted while he wasn't paying attention. Jalen stayed seated, not because he was tired, but because standing wasn't necessary anymore. Everything he needed to say had been said. Tiana whispered, "What happens now?" Jalen didn't answer right away. He just looked at the judge, waiting. Wexler finally sat up straight and cleared his throat. This court finds the complaint issued against Ms. Tiana Rowe to be without merit. The eviction process was initiated without sufficient evidence, with procedural inconsistencies, and with what this court can only describe as a troubling pattern of selective enforcement. The words hit hard, not just because they were a win, but because they were real, documented, spoken aloud, on record. In addition, Wexler continued, the court recommends the matter be reviewed by the appropriate housing authority for possible violations of the Arizona Fair Housing Act. Lowell tried to interject. Your Honor, if I may. You may not, Wexler replied without looking at him. You had your chance. He turned toward Jalen now. His expression had changed. Still stern, still formal, but there was something else under it. A pause, a kind of weight behind his voice that hadn't been there before. Mr. Prescott, he said, I owe you an apology. Jalen tilted his head slightly. When you walked into this room, I dismissed you. I saw a hoodie. I saw a teenager. I didn't see an advocate. That was my mistake. Somewhere in the back row, someone murmured, about time. Wexler didn't flinch. You have demonstrated extraordinary skill, knowledge, and self-control. You defended your family with dignity. You navigated complex legal standards with clarity. And you kept your composure under pressure most adults couldn't handle. Jalen gave a small nod. I appreciate that, he said, quiet, even. Wexler looked down at his paperwork, then back up. This court session is adjourned. The gavel struck once. It was done. No applause, just quiet. Tiana exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Her shoulders dropped. She turned to Jalen, eyes full but not crying. You did it! He didn't smile. He just stood up, closed his binder, and packed it into his backpack like it was just another Tuesday. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. The clerk approached him on the way out and tapped his shoulder. Hey, she said, you ever think about taking the bar one day? You've got something. Jalen gave her the same calm look he gave everyone. Maybe, if they'll let me. Outside the courthouse, the air was warmer. People walked past like nothing had happened inside. Jalen and Tiana sat on the bench near the bus stop, the same one where they waited an hour just a week ago to file the paperwork. She nudged him with her shoulder. Seriously, thank you. He nodded, watching a car pull up and idle at the curb. Just didn't want to see you pushed out for no reason. But how'd you even learn all that? He looked down, fiddling with the zipper on his backpack. I had to. Nobody else was going to do it. Tiana didn't say anything. She just leaned back, watching the clouds move over the sun. Jalen finally cracked a smile. Not big, but real. You hungry? I'm starving. I got $20. Then you're buying. They both laughed. Not loud, but it carried. Because in a system that rarely listens, one calm voice backed by truth can echo louder than a room full of titles. Some stories don't need explosions to make noise. Sometimes, the loudest moment is when a teenager in beat-up sneakers proves that intelligence doesn't come with a dress code, and justice doesn't belong only to those in suits. Jalen Prescott didn't walk into that courtroom looking like anyone's idea of a hero, but he walked out with something more powerful than approval. He walked out with proof that knowledge can shake a system, that preparation beats perception, and that when you stand up for someone else, even when you're underestimated, disrespected, and talked down to, you can make people see what they've ignored for years. Judge Wexler saw it. The courtroom saw it. And if we're paying attention, we should see it too. Because every neighborhood has a Jalen, some quiet kid in the back of the room, Some kid who watches more than he talks, who reads, listens, and remembers everything. But the world keeps trying to tell him to sit down, to stay in his lane, to wait his turn. What if he didn't? What if we actually made space for voices like his before they had to fight their way in? If this story made you think, even just a little, share it. Talk about it. Ask yourself who gets overlooked in your own life. And if you're the one people keep underestimating, stay ready, stay sharp, speak up when it counts. They'll hear you, eventually.